Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. I'm about to have a conversation about the Rohingya people of Burma, or now called Myanmar, with two experts on the subject. That is, in England, we have Zarni. And I was calling him Maung Zarni, but he tells me that just means Mr. So hello, Zarni. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Meta.
Hi, and Zarni was born in Mandalay and had just before the 1988 uprisings there, or turbulence in that country, moved to the United States and did a degree in Wisconsin. So he's now living in Britain, and we also have say hello, Paul. This is.
Hi, Meta.
This is Paul Copeland, who is a friend of mine here in Toronto. He is a retired human rights lawyer and very well known for his work on behalf of all kinds of people who need help. I got to know him some years ago when I was friends with a lot of people coming in from Burma as refugees, and he was always the person they would go to for help. I noticed that he's wearing his Order of Canada pin. It's a little round, looks like a flower, and it's given to very distinguished people who've done wonderful work. And Paul got his a few years ago, and it deserves every petal of that flower. So good morning, both of you.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay, let's get into talking about the topic of our day. As I understand it, the International Court of Justice, commonly called the World Court, has issued a decision about a charge that was brought against the Burmese government, or the Myanmar government, and which I believe Aung San Suu Kyi went to The Hague and spoke on behalf of the government about their mistreatment of the Rohingya people. So maybe, Zarni, you would be so good as to give us a little background about the history of that situation.
Rohingyas are pre-colonial, pre-modern Burma people, like many other ethnic nationalities or minorities of Burma, that constitute, about 40% of the entire population of Burma. And our country, or my country, is a product of that dissolution of British Empire at the end of World War II. And the Rohingyas occupy what has become Western Burmese state of Arakan or Rakhine, and they are borderland people. And so Rohingyas, like other ethnic minority groups who occupy borderlands, they are bicultural people. They can belong in the adjacent Bengali province of Chittagong. They can belong in Burma, demographically, ethnically, historically. But at the same time, what is important is to understand the Rohingyas as the political citizens of Burma. That was how they were recognized upon independence in 1948 by.
Could I ask one thing? As you mentioned, they could be, culturally, they could be part of Chittagong, Bangladesh, or they could be part of now, I understand that predominantly they're Muslim, and that is something that a lot of the Burmese don't appreciate. But is there a linguistic difference too? Do they speak Bengali or primarily a distinctive language?
Well, even within the state of Bangladesh, the country of Bangladesh, the Bengalis spoken in the Chittagong province and in the capital city are two different things. And so the Rohingya language is 60% similar to Chittagonian Bengali language spoken across the border. But language itself does not place people in a particular nationality category. For instance, Canadians, a majority of you speak English. You would not describe yourself as English. So by the same token, we also have the Rakhine people, who are the majority in the Rakhine state, where Rohingyas are also considered native. They speak their language, Arakanese or Rakhine, and my language, Burmese. There are a lot of overlaps, but we can understand roughly what the other person's saying. But we will not categorize or identify ourselves as Rakhine, and vice versa. So the problem, you mentioned about Rohingya being predominantly Muslims. The only difference between the Rohingya borderland people, the subject of our conversation, and other ethnic minorities is Rohingyas are predominantly Muslim. Other minorities are Buddhist, Christians primarily, in other parts of the Burmese borderlands, simply because Rohingya happen to be predominantly Muslims. Their religious identity become an unwelcome issue. And upon independence, most of the ethnic minorities over the next 20 years since independence from 1948 from Britain rose up against what they saw as a new colonial rule. This time, the minorities in Burma, in a larger context, of which Rohingyas are part, they view and experience Burmese independence from Britain as simply being, them released from the clutch of white man's rule, alien colonial rule, into the brown man's colonial rule. So that has been a major, major trigger for all the conflicts that have been raging on in different parts of Burma. And Rohingyas are one of the groups. But like I said, what distinguishes their situation is that their identity is considered, in the Burmese Buddhist eyes, a problem. That is why they have been singled out, as opposed to other minorities who also face colonial situation, but are not subject to the basically national project of extermination.
Okay. When you say that they see themselves as released from the rule of white people into the rule of brown people, are you saying that these ethnic communities within Burma, and you say 40% of Burma's ethnic, that they see the brown people who are their new rulers as the Burmese, or rather the Burman population, or who are these brown people who are their new rulers?
Well, the brown people, I belong to that brown category. We are all like brown, and if you go up to the highlands, that the skin is a bit fairer. But most of the Burmese are from the dry zone and the lowland people, and we are Buddhist, and we have been the most militaristic and domineering tribe, if you will, of all the different groups.
Now that's, and so, Burman. Is that the Burman?
The Burman, the Burmese, Myanmar, all these words refer to the dominant group. Although we attempt to use that our own identity as the norm, the standard. So we attempt to subsume other identities into our internally colonial label Burmese. So if you call a Shun a Burmese, he will be offended. By the same token, they can be Buddhist. So we the Shuns are primarily Buddhist. Karen people are also majority Buddhist. Rakhines are also Buddhist. All of them are up in arms against the Burmese, who are their co-religionists. Yeah, and so what complicates the situation is Islam is considered a violent, invasive sort of, in quotes, virus, to use the dehumanizing language the Burmese public have been primed to use.
But now my impression was that these multiple ethnic communities are very disparate, and they don't think of themselves as a unity at all, but that nevertheless, all of the other tribal groups or ethnic groups are aligned against the Rohingya. And it's only the Rohingya that are treated as really not part of the society. Is that fair enough?
I think that situation is changing. The Rohingyas, and even like, Muslims with Indian root, they had been a very important and integral part of, post-independence Burma. They were instrumental in, forging a broad-based independence movement, of which Aung San Suu Kyi's father became an iconic figure. So when the country was, declared independence, all these groups like Anglo-Indians, Eurasians, that have been born and raised in Burma, all of them made up and identified with the new Burma, because the early nationalists who looked to the United States or Soviet Russia, they saw a political citizenship separate from nativist, ethnic, or religious identities. So that was, with that sort of broad, big tent national identity, the country began to move towards a modern political system. But since the early crop of, I would say, politically enlightened nationalist leaders who treated nationalism as more like a political and civic community building, as opposed to, tribalist, nativist, populist, the current situation. Since that crop was either assassinated or pushed out of power, the country has been regressing in terms of national identity formation. Therefore, we have a situation where you describe resistance to join in a larger national identity. So people cling on to ethno-linguistic or religious identities, smaller identities, because they see their linguistic and religious identities as basically a force to push back the colonizing Burmese and their forcible imposition and assimilation at the expense of their cultures and identities.
I disagree with Maung a little bit, or Zarni a little bit, I'm sorry, in that my understanding is that the people who are now called the Rohingya, when Britain or the British Raj annexed Western Burma, they brought in a lot of the Rohingya people in about 1820 to be the people doing the agricultural work in that part of the state. And they brought them into the Arakan state, which had one time been an independent kingdom. So there's some discord between the Arakanese or the Rakhine and the Rohingya. And when the independence was declared, I think I'm correct in saying that the Rohingya were more interested in being part of Eastern Pakistan at the time, but they were included in Burma. They were granted citizenship, and they had citizenship until the military took it away in 1982. And at that point, their life got a whole lot worse. And I have a whole bunch of comments about ethnic minorities in the various groups, because I'm on the board of something called the Associate to Develop Democratic Burma, which is run or headed up by Harn Yongwei. And he used to do a lot of work trying to get the ethnic minorities to reach peace agreements with the central government. When Aung San had originally started the independence movement, and he was assassinated before it came to fruition, they had something called the Panglong Agreement, which was to try and get the ethnic minorities to agree to be part of the country. And I think I'm correct in saying they were supposed to remain part of the country for 10 years, and then they could have some further discussions. And some of the ethnic groups didn't last anywhere near 10 years. The Karen, I think, wanted out of the Panglong Agreement earlier than most of the other people. But I've worked with Kachin, I've worked with Karen, I've worked with Shan people, as well as with people from Burma. I've had very little involvement with the Rohingya other than paying attention to what's happened to them over the years.
Yeah. Yes, you are correct. Arakan Kingdom was for several centuries before the eventual sacking of its capital in Maung in 1785 by the Burmese. Essentially 5 or 6 years after the French Revolution, the Burmese overran the Arakan capital and then annexed the Arakan into the Buddhist Burmese kingdom. So this is like Buddhist against Buddhist. One Buddhist kingdom, stronger militarily and more expansionistic from the dry zone and from the plains, annexing the coastal kingdom, another Buddhist kingdom, ethnically different, that was named Arakan. But here's the thing, this is a bit like the looking at places in Eastern Europe like Ukraine or Poland. The borders of these kingdoms expand or shrink depending on how militarily strong this the center was. So the Arakan at some point wasn't simply the today's Rakhine province or Rakhine state in Western Burma. The Arakan actually extended well into Eastern Bengal. And so that's why when people, say the British brought the Muslim Bengalis who later became Rohingya in Burma, I think, Paul, that is factually incorrect, because you could not have a community that has been for centuries a part of Arakan when Arakan was expansive and covering most of Eastern Bengal, like today's Bangladesh. They have been split into two. That's why Amartya Sen described the situation as it is not the situation of Rohingyas coming to Burma. It is a situation where Burma came to Rohingya. Yeah, that's how you describe it. Amartya Sen, Bengali economist and political philosopher, born in Dhaka, in fact, and then spent part of his childhood in Mandalay. The other thing is the seasonal migrations has been there because if you travel to Chittagong, the southernmost part of Bangladesh today, and also western Burma today, called Rakhine State. Geomorphologically, these entities are indistinguishable, and linguistically they are intertwined. They have relatives on Burmese side, or they have relatives on the Arakhani side, Bangladesh side. The same applies to every single borderland ethnic minorities. You have Kachins on the Chinese Yunnan side. You have Shan on the Thailand side. The Chin people. That they have different names depending on their geographic location is after the artificial boundaries of nations are drawn. And that is why I actually contest the narrative that the Rohingyas are essentially Bengalis who were brought in by the British. The historical presence of Rohingyas in Burma have been established by primary sources at least 50 years before the British arrived in Arakan state in 1824. That was the first colonial entry of Britain into Western Burma. By then, that was no longer Arakan state. It was already an annexed colony of the Burmese. So that's why I think we want to be careful about how not to characterize the Rohingya, because otherwise we reinforce the popular and official Burmese narratives. The Rohingyas came to Burma as the result of colonial rule, and so their presence is described by the army chief as unfinished business. And so the finished business looked like driving every single Rohingya out of the country. Then the Burmese nationalists would claim that they have restored or they have set the historical scores, back to 1820. So that was that has been the official and popular narrative that denationalized the Rohingyas. It's like the Jews in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, particularly Eastern European Jews. They were declared all of a sudden, non-German citizens, and so that is why I respectfully, dispute Paul's characterization here.
Who are the Rakhine people, and what is their cultural orientation? How have they got along with the people who, living in that state with them, the Rohingya?
Rakhine state today is has always been a coastal kingdom, coastal political and demographic and ethnic community. By definition, coastline attracts and absorbs ideas and people from across the larger civilization, across the Bay of Bengal, which is like Indian civilization, which is Indian civilization is not primarily Hindu, as you know. It is really a multi-civilization. And then this is also the entry point for the Dutch, Spanish, the Portuguese early traders and the adventurers. So this is basically the Arakan was one of the most cosmopolitan place among all the landlocked the old kingdoms or modern political entities in Burma today. It's like Toronto. If you go to Alberta, that is inland landlocked. But if you're in Toronto, you continues to grow. Identity continues to evolve. You are able to absorb and facilitate the emergence of new identities where, for different waves of immigrants come. There are also Rakhine people who converted to Christianity, who converted to the Muslim Islam. And so the crucial thing is to look at these, the ethnic identities in Burma, and most particularly coastal areas, as something that is living rather than set in stone. And you are born into Rakhine family, and then 2 generations later, maybe you assimilated into the larger Burmese identity, because that is the way migrants survive. These identities are a product of a number of things, and one is survival and power calculations. That is why I don't want to answer Rakhines as, okay, the Rakhines are dark, Rakhines are Buddhist, Rakhines are fairer complexion, and also, Rakhines have also been, intermarried into other Burmese or Shan or others, yeah? And so that's why I think the problem we have had is the Burmese have been fed this extremely static and unreal notion of who ethnic groups are. Yeah, and then to make things worse, Orientalists come in and lock these identities and adopt their favorite ethnic groups, martial people or lazy natives. 250 years ago, you do not have you would not have found a single human that would describe him or herself as Canadian.
Sure.
Yeah. Now today's Canadian identity is solidly established. That's why I'm saying I'm contesting that the Rakhines or Rohingyas, many of them are mixed, and I am mixed. And I tell you, I lived in Burma for 25 years and I worked on this issue for so long. I'm 56. I have never met a single Burmese who can claim empirically he or she is, in quote, pure.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see, because now there's been, I've been interested, or I was 10, 15 years ago, quite interested in what was happening because there were so many people coming from what was then being renamed as Myanmar. And that's when I met Paul, because he was very deeply engaged with supporting people who needed a lot of help. And I think I'd like to have a kind of a rundown on from both of your perspectives on that period when the government was a military government, and when we thought that Aung San Suu Kyi and her democratic movement was going to save the country, and we were rooting for them and supporting them. But things have turned around so remarkably in our feelings about them, or especially about her. Let's talk about that, and then talk about what has gone on in the last year or so as the case was brought before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The charge that the government was perpetrating genocide or definitely crimes against the population, the Rohingya people.
In 1988, I did a trip around the world. I was in Thailand for a while, did a hill tribe trek with a guy named David Jai, who's since passed away, who'd been a student leader in the student uprising in 1962 in Rangoon. I was there in February of 88, and then the summer of 88, and they describe it as 8/8/88, so August 8th, 88. There was a student uprising for democracy in Burma. The military had been in a dictatorship since 1962 when they seized power. And so I got involved in the process then. And I've been back to Burma, I guess, 4 times over that time period. But I was very interested in their struggle for getting rid of the military regime. The military repression of the student movement was horrible. Aung San Suu Kyi happened to be in Burma at the time. She was living in Oxford with her husband, who was teaching Tibetan studies at Oxford University. And she was supportive of the 8/8/88 movement. There were about 3,000 students and other people killed by the military. And things got, if anything, more repressive. She remained in Burma, although she was probably free to leave, but she remained in support of the people who wanted democracy in their country. And that went on. Her house arrest went on really until, I think, 1998. But the movement was not at all successful. Eventually, the military held what they described as free elections, I think in 2010. By then, Aung San Suu Kyi and other people had formed the National League for Democracy, but they didn't run in the election because they didn't think it was a fair election. She ran in a by-election in about 2012 and got elected to Parliament, but it was very much controlled by the military. And they had brought in a new constitution before the 2010 election, which still left the military in power. And she ran in 2012, got elected, and then her party won the election in 2015. But the way the Constitution is set up, the military controls 25% of the seats in the government, and so they still have very substantial control. And she's been now the state councillor since 2015. They wouldn't let her become president or prime minister. I can't remember which term is correct. And things have not improved a whole lot. As I may have mentioned, I'm on the board of something called the Associates Developed Democratic Burma, and Harn Yongwei and the ADDB DDP were seeking to have work out peace agreements, what's called Pelong 2, with the military, well, with the government, and that hasn't gone well at all. And in fact, Aung San Suu Kyi and her government have barred Han from having multiple entry visas to Burma, so that they basically stymied the peace process.
Metta, what I want to add is I think like one helpful way to understand the last 30 years since the 88 the uprisings, which Paul described, first led by the students, later became a nationwide popular uprising. The primarily anti-military dictatorship against General Ne Win's 26 years old, one-party rule. So this was basically the uprising that became the largest in modern political history. That took place about a little over a year before the fall of Berlin Wall in November 1989. Just to give a sense of the comparative time frame here, and so that uprising was followed by various types of economic, diplomatic, and political sanctions from the United States, Canada, as well as the European Union. That was the time when Western powers felt they could afford human rights for the rest of the world, because the major rival, the USSR, collapsed, and China had not become a powerful force to reckon with as it is today. And so towards 2008, after
let me get clear a little bit about that period. You're putting this in the context of the Cold War, the opposition of Canada and the Western states, Western countries, to the regime of that period somehow was related to the Cold War.
No.
When they had sanctions against the Burmese government.
Post-Cold War, the first sanction was snapped by the European Union, followed by the Clinton administration in 1997. So this.
What would they say that they were sanctioning? They were opposing the government of Burma for doing.
The rationale behind Western sanctions, particularly USA and the European Union, was the pervasive human rights violations and the nullification of the election results. Out of 1990. which Popular Democratic Front,
Okay.
led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won a landslide. Yeah. So there were two major issues. One was the general human rights situation that continued to worsen for the public as well as the minorities, and the other was the denial of the rights of elected representatives to convene the parliament. Yeah. But what was interesting, I mean, the reason I brought up the larger context here was, for the first 26 years of the military rule from 1962 to 1988, the West was deep in the Cold War logic. And so all of a sudden, their favorite or one-time favorite bastards became no longer acceptable, you see. The United States, even including Jimmy Carter's administration, was in cahoot with General Ne Win and the Burmese military dictatorship. Yeah, and the Americans were giving the Burmese military, hundreds of millions of US dollars in the name of anti-narcotic operations. Yeah, because Burma happened to be in those days #1 heroin producing country. Before it was taken over by Afghanistan. As the #1 heroin producing country or region. And so I think what I'm trying to say is after 1997, when the two major sanctions were imposed on Burma by the US and by the European Union, that sanction policy crippled the economy, and also curtailed the freedom of travels by the Burmese military leaders, because there was also a visa ban. Yeah, and that remained status quo for the next 10 years until China began to rock the geopolitical boat. And then the European Union as well as the United States began to feel worried that if Burma continued to be isolated, it would become basically a vassal state for China, which the West did not see it in its interest. So because of that, the West began to rebalance, in Obama's lingo, its policy, and so out of that rebalancing around 2008, 2009, 2010, under Obama administration, both the European Union and the U.S. government decided that they would, lift the sanctions in exchange for some movements by the military towards reforms. And that included the release of Aung San Suu Kyi from her last and third house arrest, and relaxation of restrictions on civil liberties. Yeah, all of that was triggered by the Western geopolitical concerns about China. So human rights has been used as a reform, Burmese reform. The significance of reforms was blown out of proportion. So around the period Paul was describing, when Aung San Suu Kyi was released, she was allowed to contest in the parliament, which she did in 2012, became an MP, and then 2015, her party contested in the national general election and won a landslide. And all of that, was, held up by the likes of Obama as an extraordinary or model democratic transition, which, the regimes in Tehran and Pyongyang should emulate. So that was the larger narrative. And what we are dealing with now, you mentioned about ICJ, the World Court's intervention in this case. We are dealing with a very ugly reality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
After this, Western facilitated Burmese honeymoon, of democracy. That it was described as Myanmar Spring in those days. How could a country in democratic transition supposedly spring from the model extraordinary spring to the country that stands credibly accused of committing a genocide and stopping all forms of genuine ceasefire or peace building initiatives?
It's not the way we had construed things. Paul, what's your angle on this?
No, I agree. I agree mostly with what Zarni said. But she went from being an amazing icon to being quite reviled now. Some of your readers won't know that Canada originally granted her honorary citizenship and then took it away relatively recently.
But then the question is, was it really a transformation, or had we all misperceived her in the first place?
Well, I mean, I supported Aung San Suu Kyi for the first 15 years of my public activism, as a student in the United States. If the world feels it's been fooled by Aung San Suu Kyi, well, I'm one of those people who feel that we have been conned, because it's difficult to get into her head and what what makes her tick in terms of a series of what I think are monumentally wrong miscalculations and misjudgments as to what type of leadership and what types of policies she should be pursuing. My view is that the manufacturing of Aung San Suu Kyi as a Mandela-like, Gandhi-like icon, wasn't done in a one-sided fashion by the outside world, the media or politicians or political pundits. She actively participated in the construction of herself in the mold of these genuinely iconic revolutionary leaders. But I think now with the benefit of the hindsight of the 30 years, and also as somebody who knows her personally, I would say Aung San Suu Kyi has never, ever been a principal believer in either democracy or human rights. She is an autocrat through and through, and she has a sense of destiny to rule the country by virtue of the fact that her father was or is the revered father of the country. That's how the Buddhist majority see him, but not the minorities. That's a different story. And so I think, as someone who has been an activist for 30 plus years, I can tell you this: everybody has to compromise. And that life itself is a compromise. But I think there is a line. If pursuit of power requires that they throw away everything, they resign, they stop. Bishop Desmond Tutu, openly, after having failed to persuade her to change the direction, with Aung San Suu Kyi face to face, to travel to Rangoon, and then he would call her our little sister among the club of Nobel laureates, and this gentleman who has supported her the longest time since the day she won the Nobel Prize, and finally 2 years ago, to publicly admonished her, saying, if your ambition is to seek power as to become head of state so that you could do good things for the country. This like utilitarian consequentialist logic. Yeah, for the greater good you sacrifice some things. Tutu said, you are paying the price that is no longer worth what you are pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I did this a little bit with you yesterday. I think a huge amount of credit goes to the Minister of Justice of Gambia. He had been a prosecutor in the Rwanda trials in Africa. And I think he knew more, my impression is he knew more about the Genocide Convention and the International Court of Justice, and that he's the one who mobilized all of the, well, first Gambia and then all of the Muslim nations to support the hearing at the World Court. So the world owes him a huge debt of gratitude.
I think so, clearly, but let's also remind our listeners exactly what happened. I think starting in 2017, there was this situation that caused so many Rohingya to flee from Myanmar.
Well, let me start at 2010, because that's the first time, it isn't the first time, but there were huge attacks on the Rohingya. 110,000 of them ended up in IDP camps in Burma. There were periods of time when Médecins Sans Frontières wasn't allowed to even go in the camps to provide health. And that broke up. The result of that, the Burmese who I'd been working with and Canadian Friends of Burma split very badly, mostly in the anti-Rohingya side. So that organization blew apart. Then in 2017, the reports are that some of the Rohingya attacked a few military bases. And I think that they killed 12 military people, about 60 of their own. And then the military just unleashed a huge, horrible attack all over Rakhine State. And that's when the 750,000 of them fled to Bangladesh. So that part of things starts in most dramatic fashion in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And
can I just?
My impression is that the government of Myanmar has no interest in repatriation and just keeps stalling around.
The Rohingya persecution started out as the demographic re-engineering of northern Rakhine, which is immediately adjacent to predominantly Muslim Bangladesh, across the border. There's a land border and also river border, about 170 miles long border. Yeah, and that border, this border and demographic issues is so crucial here. We are a country located or surrounded by 5 other different nations, including 2 giant nations, India and China. We have borders with both India and China over 1,300 miles long each, with each country. And then with Thailand, we have about 800 miles long borders, and then a small border with Laos. And then Bangladesh on the west side, it's only 170 miles long border. And of all these border regions, we use the gate, the fortress metaphor, only in reference to Muslim area. Yeah. So it's like you talk about like Donald Trump building walls and stuff. This is the fortress mentality that has been carefully cultivated by successive military strategists and propagandists in Burma.
The scale of the deaths, the burning of the villages, the rape, all of these things, the number of people injured and killed and who've had to flee, and the conditions under which they're living now, that needs to be described a little bit.
I think If I give you the figures, it will become very clear. If you look at the doctor-patients ratios for the Rohingyas, not since 2017, but around 1992, 93. So out of that state logic to remake this Muslim area into Buddhist, the state has created conditions of life, that no human community can bear. Here's a statistic. The doctor-patient ratios for Rohingyas is one doctor is to about 150,000 Rohingya. The national average for all other ethnic and classes, ethnic communities and classes is one doctor is to 2,000 to maximum 3,000 Burmese of different groups. For Rohingya, 150,000 Rohingya have access to only one doctor. When they want to move from one village to the next, where there might be a midwife or rudiments of health clinic, they have to go through Gaza style, West Bank style security checkpoints. The Physicians for Human Rights based in Boston and New York did a study. On average, a Rohingya pregnant woman or child will have to go through 5 security checkpoints to get from point A to point B to access health services. And also their physical movement, freedom of movement is so severely restricted that they cannot access the sources of nutrition, like where they can fish from creeks and rivers and coastal lines, and then they cannot access the rice fields and other vegetations without having to pay hefty bribes to the authorities. So these areas are essentially open, vast prisons.
As I understand it, more than half of the population fled because there was an attack by, I guess, the military, burning their houses and killing them and raping them. I mean, this is not just deprivation of medical care. It was pretty close to genocide, if not really.
There are two things. One is the policy-induced deplorable conditions of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slow process of destroying this community. And then secondly, the direct violence and genocidal destruction, the one that you were referring to, burning of villages, in an area that stretches about 68 miles long. 400 exclusively Rohingya villages were either torched or blown up, with military-grade dynamite or using rocket launchers, and close to 40,000 structures of the infrastructures like mosque, rice warehouses, commercial establishment, villages, schools, clinics, all gone. 68 miles long stretch. It's just barren land. The land is being reclaimed by Aung San Suu Kyi's government. It's being primed for commercial and agricultural development. So I have studied this issue for the last 10 years. And, that is why I think, when Paul described the Gambian justice minister, a former ICC prosecutor, I think he's absolutely right. We are looking at nothing less than a genocidal situation. The military sends troops on the, under the pretext of anti-terrorist operation. The United States and Canada and other Western governments have been engaged in global war against or on terror. But we do not see a parallel situation where U.S. has burned down 400 villages in the name of anti-terrorism. That is what we have. So this is not an anti-terrorism situation or policy that Burmese government is pursuing. This is how Aung San Suu Kyi described it at the International Court of Justice when she was presenting Myanmar's defense as the agent of the country. That this is a genocidal situation. That is why this becomes the third case in the history of the application of Genocide Convention. Because the situation is so serious that the ICJ, the World Court, unanimously intervened to say that this is the case that must be allowed to proceed.
The World Court has rendered a judgment and has ordered the government to do something. What do you see as the outcome of that case?
Well, the outcome in the orders that were made were fine. Whether the government of Myanmar will actually comply with any of that, I don't think so. They've been in denial all along and have stalled things. There's been discussion, as I mentioned earlier, about repatriation, and nothing has happened on that. And I don't think anything's going to happen on that. I think the government of Myanmar is going to continue to stall and do nothing in regard to alleviating the situation of the Rohingya.
Well, it's certainly a question now about, in general, when the World Court makes a decision, how can it be enforced? If in fact, as you say, the government of Myanmar will simply ignore it, what penalties could be applied to bring them back into compliance?
Knowledge of the World Court and their powers is virtually nil, so I really can't answer that question. I've read stuff where it's talking about it may take 6 years to have the court come to a final judgment. So it's not made the orders that they've made, but I don't know how much difference it's going to make.
Well, can I kind of comment on this because I was inside the court when the presiding judge, I think from Ethiopia, was reading a 28-page judgment order, I should say. This is Metta. This is the order that was designed, that essentially say the state of Myanmar must prevent or protect the Rohingyas that remain inside the country, a little over 500,000, and secondly, the government of Myanmar is ordered to preserve the crime scene. That 68-mile stretch. In my view, will be full of the mass graves and remnants of charred villages and whatnot. Yeah, but I don't think we can dismiss the court's order as simply unenforceable. It is unenforceable because like you said, lawyers and judges do not have the power in and of themselves, unless they are backed by law enforcement agencies and the entire might of a state. In this case, the international law does not have an enforcement mechanism except the Security Council that can invoke or trigger Chapter 7. But we know that's not going to happen because Security Council cannot be united on any issue of importance to any one of us. From Palestine to the Ukraine to the Crimea or Kashmir, and so I think the way, as an activist, the way I look at it is I don't look at what the impact of this order. This is an interim order, not a final judgment. The order does not say that Myanmar is found to be commissioning the crime of genocide. It just simply established that there is a plausibility, high possibility, that the Gambia team has established convincingly that towards the end of the court case, the court will find Myanmar guilty of genocide. Yeah. So this is the case that is proceeding on the fact that the threshold of plausibility has been established, plausibility that there is a genocide going on. Yeah. And so, but the way I look at it is that this raises the reputational, diplomatic, and political price of the Burmese government and all its entities. Already, if a country is the subject of genocide lawsuit, a lot of foreign investors, with the exception of China or like Asian investors, are shying away from this, and also from the campaigning perspective, we are in a position to say that Myanmar is a subject of genocide allegation. Therefore, like no Western or other international companies that care about its reputation or image must not invest in Burma. And then also, I think because genocide is not simply about the Burmese military, the genocide is about the conduct of all institutions of the state that have mobilized public opinion. So we are calling for essentially severing institutional ties with the Burmese state. Yeah. So this gives us a new platform from which we can mobilize public opinion. We can tell people the kinds of small things they can do. Say, for instance, a lot of Canadian companies that are eyeing the Burmese market, particularly mining sector, maybe insurance and other sectors, they should be told that as Canadians, you don't think it's right to get into a foreign market, however lucrative, particularly when there is a genocide case going on at the world's highest court. So in that sense, I don't think this is just simply a statement issued by the World Court that cannot be enforced.
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear you say that. I would hate to leave us with the sense of, well, yes, you can go to court and nothing will happen. Everybody has a role to play in bringing justice to the world. And this little conversation itself, I hope, if disseminated among the right people will watch it and reach some opinion as to what they can contribute to bringing justice and protecting of human rights for the Rohingya people. And so I really, really want to thank both of you.
So much. Thanks for taking so much time. Bye, Paul. Hope to see you again sometime.
Yeah,
okay.
bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.